Good morning, and let me share with you something interesting. Genesis 15:1. After these things, the word of the Lord came upon Abraham in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abraham, I am thy shield, and thy exceedingly great reward. Now, if you read the story of Abraham, who's later referred to as, or Abram, and his name was changed to Abraham, you'll discover that after the words, after these things, that's what's really found in the verse itself. After these things came, then the word of the Lord came to Abraham. Words from the heart of God, Devar. Uh, and this is a reference to the account of Abraham rescuing his nephew Lot from four kings and their armies. God gave him a great victory over these armies. And, he just gathered his servants together, untrained men in warfare, and took them against these four kings, against a trained army, and God gave him a great victory, and he rescued his nephew Lot. So here he is, a victorious warrior, leader, and claiming a great victory in this war. And the word of the Lord comes to him and says, Fear not. I would expect this vision to come before Abraham took his band of untrained servants to go against these seasoned warriors who totally outnumbered him. Yet here he is coming off the throes of a great victory. I mean, this old boy had to really be pumped. Then the Lord said, Fear not. If there was one time not to be fearful, it would be at this time. Abraham had all the proof he needed to know that God was capable and able to protect him and his family and give him great victories to boot. What was Abraham fearful about? Well, the rest of the verse seems to imply that it says, Don't be afraid, I'm your shield, and to you is a great reward, exceedingly great reward. I mean, just not a great reward, exceedingly great. And it seems, though, when you read the story of Abraham, money and reward were not his goal in life. He didn't come into great riches, which were given to him by God because he wanted them. That's not what he was all about. God did, give him great riches. Nor did he, I read in his biography, unless I'm reading his biography wrong, maybe this guy really was mercenary, serving God because God wanted to pay him so well. Abraham was a man who loved God with all his heart, soul, and might. He served God out of love, not expecting anything in return other than knowing that his God was pleased with him. He loved God beyond his own life and the life of his beloved son. Maimonides, the great medieval Jewish commentator, singles out Abraham as the poster child of serving God out of pure love. The idea that Abraham, a man so devoted to God, would be concerned about getting his piece of the action, it just sort of stretches the imagination. The Talmud in Ovid 1:3 teaches that we are to be like a servant who serves his master without being motivated by attaining rewards. In other words, we should seek to live a righteous life, not to attain heaven, not to obtain great favors from God, but just to express our love to him. Yet for many such Christians, the answer to this question regarding our study verse is easy. Of course, Abraham was concerned about his reward. Who would not be? God called him to leave his land, his home, and he doesn't know, all he knows to move to some foreign and strange land. You bet your bottom dollar he expected some sort of reward. Who in their right mind would do all that without a promise of some reward? Our study verse only shows that God was reminding Abraham, hang in there, your reward is yet to come. Yet Jewish teaching instructs us not to serve God for a reward. If that is the case, then how do they reconcile this study verse to their description of Abraham as a man who served God out of love? Yet it appears from this verse that God had to promise him a reward to keep him motivated. Well, once again, I turn to Maimonides, who suggests that Abraham was not interested in the reward itself, but in something that the reward signified. Many times in an athletic event, the reward for winning a race is not very tangible. Maybe a little trophy or a ribbon. You could purchase something like that on your own, of course, but that wouldn't have any meaning because you didn't earn it. The real reward is in having achieved the goal that was set before you. The ribbon or trophy is only a tangible sign of what you accomplished. I was looking at a picture of Eisenhower, President Eisenhower. This is President Eisenhower before World War II. As you know, he doesn't have any stars. He's not yet a general. I'm not too sure if he entered World War II as a general or not. I can't remember, but nonetheless, he had already, achieved a lot. I mean, Eisenhower is probably one of the most decorated soldiers in the history of this country, at least decorated officers, generals. Look at that. He's got, counting about 10 rows of bars. And this is just before World War II. Now let's take a look at what it looks like after World War II. Huh? Man, if he got this many for World War II, you can imagine what his string of rewards look like after World War II. And that's it. There's his 5 stars, and there's his reward. Only 3. And these were awarded to him after D-Day. Eisenhower wasn't the only one responsible for D-Day, but he did give the order to launch. And this victory, maybe for Eisenhower, like for Abraham, was bittersweet, for he was aware of the many lives that were lost in the invasion that he had ordered to take place. Maybe that has something to do why he chose not to wear any of the awards of his military accomplishments, except for those involving D-Day. In fact, I understand he was only buried when he was buried. He was only buried with these rewards. I don't know the answers to why he chose just to wear these rewards and none of his other accomplishments. But I do see a parallel to Abraham, maybe because Abraham himself was a great military leader who had a tender heart. And maybe he was like, President Eisenhower was like Abraham. Only those two could really understand the emotions involved, the nagging questions that maybe more lives could have been saved had they made different decisions. I believe for Eisenhower, that haunted him all his life, that in his quiet moments, he often pondered the alternatives he could have followed in that invasion. You see, the word for afraid, where it says, don't be afraid, it's yirah. It's in an imperfect form. So it's not talking about fear of the past. It's talking about fear in the future. And yirah is a fear of how you will affect other people. It's not a fear for your own gizzard. That's pakad, when you're worried about your own safety. This is where you're worried about others and how you may affect others. That's the word yirah. I believe Abraham was kind of feeling relieved at the outcome of the war against the 4 kings, but he felt this sense of yirah, a sense that maybe if he did something different, maybe if he had a different attitude, so many lives would not have been lost. And he might have really been pondering all this when God gave him this vision and said, look, don't be afraid, I'm your shield. The word shield in Hebrew is megan, from the root word gagan, which is a word for an enclosed garden, a fence. In other words, God was telling Abraham, I'm your fence. I will guard you from any regrets, any feelings of guilt you may feel or have to bear as a result of this conflict. I know it was bloody. I know it was terrible. I'm going to protect you from any feelings of guilt you have with that. Once more, your reward's going to be great. God was going to give rewards to Abraham, not because Abraham craved and needed these material things, but to remind Abraham that he was on the right track. Rewards were only a signpost that he was in the center of God's will. Little love gifts that God sent to remind him that he was safely in God's plan. You know, Brother Andrew, I don't know if any of you ever heard of him or not. He was back in the 70s, and he was a Bible smuggler. He smuggled Bibles into countries, communist countries, countries where God was not allowed. Um, it was risky. He was risking his life every time he went into these countries to share the word of God and give Bibles to Christians. But he said, you know, you can be sure of one thing. When you're in the center of God's will, you're in the safest place you can be. And how do you know you're in the center of God's will? He'll give you little rewards to remind you that you're doing good, telling you keep going. In fact, you look at the word sakar, and it is identical to the word shakar. In fact, Rabbi Samson Hirsch, the 19th century linguist and Hebrew master, says that these two words are very, very closely related, interchangeable. And shakar means gifts. God will give you little gifts along your life's journey as signposts to reassure you, hey, you're going in the right direction. And these gifts may not be monetary. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're just simply a bird who appears to you and sings and dances before you, or a squirrel who runs up and twitches his nose, but your spirit is quickened with this. And it tells you, yes, Lord, thank you. Thank you for that little gift. Okay, so maybe if you give $100 to a ministry or $10 to a ministry, and suddenly you get $100 in return. God didn't reward you with $100 for being faithful in your giving. He didn't do it because you gave. It wasn't a payment. It was simply a gift from God, a sign that, hey, you had a right heart. You did it for the right reasons. I know, you were in need and all that, but nonetheless, I know your heart. I know the love you have for me. So just keep moving in that direction. The real key here is that we need to be certain we're always in the center of God's will. And that is accomplished by recognizing God is with us every moment, every second of the day. And you can be sure you're in the center of God's will when everything you do is unto him.